Good morning again. My name is Shannon Johns, and I'm an education specialist here at the Diagnostic Center. Today, we are here to talk about successful inclusive education intervention strategies. Primarily, this is written for the elementary classroom, but a lot of the strategies we'll be talking about are applicable across the grade levels. Um, just a few logistics to the web. I'm relatively new to giving webinars. I've done this a few times, but I haven't done one this year. So this is the first time this year. So hopefully the technology will all work the way that it is supposed to. This will be until we will be going until 10:30 this morning, and we won't be taking a break because it's only an hour and a half. We may end a little early, but we will definitely be done by 10:30. If I do ask, and I think most of you are already muted, but please do make sure you're muted so we don't get a lot of cross noise. But if you have a question, please, you can use the chat window, which I am monitoring, and send a message that way, or you can raise your hand. So I will try to be aware if I see hands raised, then I can call on you, and then hopefully, if all the sound is working as it should, you could be able to unmute yourself and ask me questions. Okay, so we will just jump in and get started. I am part of the Diagnostic Center, and the Diagnostic Center is part of the California Department of Education. There are 3 diagnostic centers located throughout the state. We are located in Fremont and cover that entire red region there on your screen from the Monterey area up to the Oregon border. There is also a diagnostic center located in Fresno that covers the mid-region of the state, and one down in LA that covers the southern part of the state. Our primary role here at the Diagnostic Center is to provide student assessments. So if a district has a student that maybe they need some new ideas for, or they're struggling with a little bit, or they're just kind of, sometimes we're called in for an IEE, or if the district is maybe struggling a little bit with the family in terms of seeing, what the student needs, then we are asked to come in and perform our assessments. So we are asked specific questions, diagnostic questions, and then our teams are put together based upon the questions that we've been asked. So I'm an education specialist. I work with speech therapists, school psychologists. We have clinical psychologists on staff, as well as a behavioral pediatrician. So based on the questions that we are asked, teams are put together, and then we either go out to the school site to do assessments, or students come here to Fremont for further assessment. Sometimes it's a combination of both types of assessment. Beyond the assessments, we do professional development trainings in person usually, and then this webinar is relatively new. We're trying to find different ways to present our information to people out there in the districts. So besides that, we also do technical assistance projects where we work in classrooms or with groups of professionals for longer periods of time, maybe a semester or up to a year or 2 years. Our website is listed here. Hopefully you received a copy of this PowerPoint. It was hopefully emailed out to you. And also if you need a copy later, I'm going to show you where you can access it. And you can also always email me, and I will be providing my email address at the end. So if you need more copies of it, you will be able to access it. This is a link to our website where you can find all information about who we are and what we do. We also have a Facebook page, and if you're a Facebook user, we encourage you to like our page. We try to post daily information related to things going on in the field of special education here in the state and across the country, and just try to post things of interest to the people who have liked our page. So we do encourage you to please like our page. Another resource through the Diagnostic Center is our Ask a Specialist page, and this is where you can submit questions on any of these topics, from autism or behavior, mental health questions. We recently added a category on inclusionary educational practices. So if you have a question, a specific question on one of these topics, you can submit it on our website, and then we answer questions, and our answers are posted on our website. Also available are our archives, so that you can go back, and if you're looking for information on a specific topic, you may be able to find it in our archives on our Ask a Specialist page. One of the statewide initiatives that's run through the diagnostic centers is CAPTAIN, which is an acronym for this big long title, California Autism Professional Training and Information Network. CAPTAIN's goal is to spread information about evidence-based practices for working with students with autism throughout the state. And their website, the website for CAPTAIN, is a wonderful place to go for any resources related to autism. So if you're looking for any information about autism, about evidence-based practices for working with students with autism, this is the place to go, and you can refer others to this website for lots of great information. The other statewide initiative run through the diagnostic centers is PENT. PENT is another acronym for Positive Environments Network of Trainers. And while CAPTAIN is all about getting information out about evidence-based practices for autism, PENT is about getting information out to districts and schools about using positive behavior supports with students. So this is another resource and another great website to check if you're looking for any information related to positive behavior support. Okay, so briefly, just a little bit about me. I am, as I said, this picture, just a few of my favorite things. I live here in Fremont with my husband and my daughter, who's just about to turn 4. And it's nice to be so close to where we work here in Fremont, although I end up traveling all over the state. I grew up in the Sacramento area and then had my big adventure and wanted to strike out and have my adventure there in Boston. So I went to Boston College for my undergraduate work, where I studied elementary education and what they called intense special needs at the time. After graduation, I moved back here to California and got a job in Newark Unified School District, which is down here near Fremont, very small district. I taught a special day class for students with moderate to severe disabilities, grades 2nd to 6th, approximately. Sometimes I had younger kids or kids that stayed a little longer. But you know, when I was doing student teaching out in Boston, my full-time practicum was in a classroom for students with severe, profound disabilities, where it was kind of like a county program where the county had rented out a room at a general education, regular elementary school. But we were just this classroom in the back corner that really was not part of the school community. We weren't included in any of the activities. My master teacher wasn't included in meetings, or we really just weren't part of the school, and that just always kind of felt wrong to me. I knew that there was something missing here, and so when I got my job teaching a special day class here in California, I was on a typical elementary school campus, and I from the very beginning said, this is something that I want to make sure, my priority is to make sure that we are part of this campus and that we are part of the school. So that meant going to every meeting and joining committees and running the talent show and going to the parent-teacher club meetings. But quickly it became clear, my students were part of that campus community. We were part of every activity. And then as I began to develop relationships with the general education teachers, it helped when I said, hey, I have this kiddo that, I need to get them out. They need time in the general education environment. And that helped me facilitate those experiences for my students, which were important. And I had all of my students, while they weren't what you may call fully included, they were all out in general education environment for different parts of their day depending on their needs. But they all had a class that they spent time with that was at their age level. And, I think that that's really important. So as I was working in Newark, I started working on my master's degree at Cal State East Bay. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with their programming up there, but their program for teachers who are going to work with students with moderate to severe disabilities is very much pro-inclusion. all students, no matter who they are, should be out fully included all day long. And so I was kind of a bit of a black sheep in the program because I taught a special day class, and I would often hear from my professors like, you need to get out of there. You need to get a job where you're, getting your students fully included. And, I was kind of torn because I just thought, well, there's still going to be special day classes out there. So, they need good teachers too, and they need teachers who are going to help get them out as much as they can. So that was important to me. So after I got my master's, I got my job here at the Diagnostic Center. So this is my sixth year here, and primarily I do assessments for students with moderate, severe, profound disabilities. I also do trainings such as this one. I also do one on assistive technology and one for paraprofessionals about working with students with moderate to severe disabilities. But the inclusion one has really become important to me. It's been something that I've been very interested in throughout my career. And I've seen just in my 6 years here at the Diagnostic Center such a big push and change in schools, and we're getting more and more referrals from districts who say, I've got this student who we're trying to get them out, we're trying to get them included, or this is really important to the team, but we need help. And so I'm getting more assessment requests where I'm going out and seeing these students and trying to help the team look at how they can improve their access and participation in the general education environment. So it's been exciting to see those trends start. So this is typically what I would love to find out a little bit about you guys and who I have with me today. And I'm scrolling down this list of participants. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. There's not too many of you. Maybe you could take a minute and just kind of put something in the chat window there about just who you are, if what your role is, if you're a special education teacher, what kind of program you're working in, or if you're maybe we have a general education teacher. The goal of this training was to have teachers, general education teachers also, but we do know that most of the teachers we reach with our trainings here at the Diagnostic Center are special education teachers. But I would love to have you guys tell me just briefly, your name and what you're doing. So I'll give you a moment for that, and then we can go from there. That's just the tough part about a webinar in person. It's much easier to have a little discussion about who everyone is, but I'm hoping that someone will send me a message in the chat window. What I'm going to do is continue moving through the slides. And as oh, look, things are popping up. Exciting. Okay, let's see. So we've got Program Specialist, El Dorado County Office, supporting charter schools statewide as well as local districts. Great. Welcome, Dana. Let's see. We've got Monica, Inclusion Teacher with children with autism. Okay, great. Welcome. Jessica, an Inclusive Education Specialist at Elk Grove Unified. Wonderful. Health and Disabilities Coordinator from Tribal Head Start Program. All right, great. Hi, Myra. Melanie, Cheryl, RSP teacher. Mike Jordan, Director of Curriculum Instruction Special Education, Center Joint Unified. Ashley, Autism Inclusion Specialist in Lodi, Program Specialist, Antelope, Autism Inclusion Specialist, Lodi Unified, part of Captain. Oh, hi, welcome. I'm part of Captain too. Great to see you working to support evidence-based practices in the general education classroom. Great. And Mel, Program Specialist. So we do have a handful of program specialists. We have some inclusion support facilitators and some different people in different kinds of leadership roles, resource teachers. Wonderful. Perfect group to have with me today. Thank you. Thanks for taking the time to send me those messages. So as you know, for the format of this training, I did send out the introductory module and background reading. So initially when we created this webinar, a couple years ago. It was 3 hours of pre-reading work and then the 1.5 hour webinar. So this year we did change it to be 3 hours total. So I cut back on the information in the introductory module and background reading material. But I'm going to be showing you some resources, and there's information that you can look at that was part of that background reading when this webinar was a little bit lengthier. So our goals here were to talk a little bit about the law and research supporting inclusive education, and then to be able to give you some specific strategies to help with the process of that. But so first, in looking at that increasing law research supporting it, at inclusive education. So some of the background reading that you were given, that I provided ahead of time, you were looking at the one system, the idea of moving toward one system of education for all students, and looking at the task force report, the special education task force report. So I hope you were able to look at that, and if you weren't, I hope that you will down the line. That report came out because in 2013, a group of people who were working in education in California were trying to figure out why so many of our students with disabilities have such a difficult time with their post-secondary outcomes. Why, the post-secondary outcomes are pretty bleak. Trying to look at, why is that happening and what can we do about it? So they got together and they looked at this issue closely, and then in 2015 they released this report. So the report is about 100 pages. I asked you to look through a few snippets of it, of information that I think is important, but I do really encourage you to read through the whole document because it's really, their overall findings suggest that students with disabilities should be educated with their peers as much as possible. And that's where kind of this big push in the state of California now has come from as we look at, moving students into more inclusive environments and having more opportunities to interact and with their peers and more exposure to the general education curriculum. So along with that, you looked at the Universal Design for Learning, which is probably a familiar topic for you, but we are really trying to increase everyone's understanding about Universal Design for Learning, and hoping that we can especially help the general education teachers understand how they can use the UDL strategies in designing their classroom lessons and activities. I saw a quote that says that UDL is not a checklist of things to do, it is a lens for thinking about everything you do. And I think that that's important, because I think sometimes teachers may think, okay, well, give me the UDL checklist and I'll make sure each thing is happening in my lessons. But it's not really just about looking at a checklist and making sure we're incorporating specific things into our lessons. It's about really thinking about everything that we're doing in the classroom and considering how we can provide multiple means of representation and engagement for the students throughout their day. So these guidelines really, we know that they help all students, not just the students with disabilities, but they're also excellent strategies for the students, the general education students as well. And then there were a couple articles that I shared about inclusion and things that are happening in the state. So I did want to mention just a little bit about a few other things. So we know that IDEA is the law that governs, what we do within special education. And, they say the IDEA says that students who receive special education services should do so in the least restrictive environment. And we know that least restrictive environment is not a place. It's a principle to kind of guide teams in looking at where they can best meet student needs and ensure their growth and success. So, it says in IDEA, it says that students should be educated with their peers, their general education peers. The quote is, to the maximum extent appropriate. So we know that that's a little nebulous. It can be a little subjective. So trying to figure out exactly what that means is part of our job, and it really depends on the student. I'm sure you've all heard of response to intervention. So it was initially RTI, response to intervention, and then they kind of expanded it to include the instruction piece. So RTI squared, response to instruction and intervention. It is a general education approach to looking at how do we provide high quality education for all students, how do we provide early intervention services for our youngest kiddos, and how do we implement behavior supports and strategies for our students who may be struggling a little bit with behavioral challenges. What's important for us to keep in mind with RTI squared is that it's talking about strategies to use in a general education environment that meet the needs of all students. So again, when we're talking about RTI, we're not just talking about those, it's a gen ed strategy, but we're not just talking about those general education students. We're also talking about our students with disabilities who are included in those classrooms, as well as, just students who maybe haven't been identified but are struggling in those general education classrooms. RTI squared is one component of the multi-tiered system of support. And we hear that acronym a lot right now, MTSS. And MTSS is a framework for kind of aligning those RTI squared strategies with the California state standards. And as teams, lots of districts are, moving through this multi-tiered system of support process right now, where they're really looking closely at what is happening in their schools, what is happening in their classrooms, and looking at the academic needs of the students, social needs, and behavioral needs, and making sure that we are providing appropriate programming for students to meet all of those needs. So as districts are moving through this MTSS process, they are looking at changes to the way that special education services are being delivered. In a minute, I'm going to show you a location where you can find lots of resources. And on that Padlet, which I'll be explaining in a minute, you will find a couple videos. I'll point them out when I pull up the Padlet about looking specifically at multi-tiered system of supports and instruction, and then another video that looks at how one particular group of educators is using the MTSS process to improve behavioral supports for their students. So those are some great resources for you to check out, and you can share with other people. Just one more note, we know that the main education law for our country is the Every Student Succeeds Act, the SSA, and it was signed in December 2015 by President Obama. And we know that now that there's we have new administration, there will probably be changes to this, but at this point, this is still the law that stands. And if you check the website, you will see that they're starting to make some adjustments to it. But bottom line, when you read through the ESSA and you look at it closely, what it says about education for students with disabilities is that they should be ensured access to the general education curriculum, and they should be ensured access to activities that have been planned with universal design for learning strategies in mind. So again, it ensures access to the general education curriculum and access to concepts of UDL. And both of those components that are written into this law are also outcomes and recommendations that came out of our state task force report that did say both of those things, that the students should have access to this gen ed curriculum and classrooms, and that we need to be using UDL. So I'm going to show you, okay, let's hope my technology works like it should. I'm going to bring this website over here for you. Okay, perfect now. There we go. Hopefully you can see it. This is called a Padlet. And if you're not familiar with Padlet, it's kind of like an online bulletin board, similar to Pinterest, but you can create it however you want on whatever topic you want. So I have created this Padlet on inclusion resources, and so you have the URL there in the handout from today, and this Padlet is up and posted, and you have access to it anytime. And people always ask me, like, when are you going to take it down? When's it going to go away? And it's not, unless, I don't know, Padlet goes away. It's going to stay there. And my goal is to continually add to it, to change it. Yes, things there, like for example, I have information up there about CASC and links to their website for the UDL information. And CASC recently have changed some of their website things, so I went in there and changed it on the Padlet. So I'm going to try to keep it up to date. And as I learn new things, which I'm constantly doing, and as people share things with me, if you have any great resources for inclusion, I encourage you to send them to me, and then I can add them here. But just to kind of walk you through it a little bit, these left two columns, it says background information, and some of these activities here or articles or videos are things that I had kind of assigned either this time or in the past when we had more pre-reading for this webinar, are links to those things. You'll see here there are two videos. These are the two videos I talked about, the multi-tiered system of supports to meet academic needs and multi-tiered system of supports to meet behavioral needs. So those two videos I encourage you to watch. Lots of resources here. And then we have some useful links in the next column here, which is basically links to Diagnostic Center pages and information about evidence-based practices for students with autism, and then some of the resources that we're going to be talking about later today. So I will be kind of moving back and forth between the PowerPoint and the Padlet as we get into some of my strategies here, and I have some sample documents that I'm going to be walking you through. So that's all here on the Padlet. Now, one thing I wanted to try, I haven't done this before, and I'm hoping the audio works as it should, but there's a short video here that's kind of inspiring. It's a great analogy, I think, for inclusion. So I'm going to show this, and hopefully it works. If it's not working and you're not hearing it, or then please let me know, but I'm going to try to show this now.
Hi, my name is Shelley Moore, and I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. As Canadians, we have a reputation for finding and embracing the strength in our diversity. This value, however, hasn't been reflected in our classrooms, which still segregates students by ability, especially students with developmental disabilities. There's a gap in our understanding about what we know inclusive education to be, philosophically, versus what we understand and the importance of understanding inclusion in our practice. This is the question I'm trying to answer in my research, is how can we find the value in the day-to-day practice in our classrooms in terms of inclusive education? So how am I going to explain this to you? Now I could sit here and try and describe this, or we could have a little bit more fun. Why don't we go bowling? So let's talk about bowling. You have 10 pins, you have 2 balls, and you have a lane. The goal is to knock down as many pins as you can. But if you don't get them all, it's okay because you have another chance. But when I bowl and roll the ball down the middle and I don't knock them all down, what often ends up happening to me is that there's 2 pins left standing on either end and they stare at you. It's the 7-10 split, and it's the hardest shot in bowling. How is bowling like teaching? The ball was the lesson, the pins are the kids. We aim for the middle, we do the best we can. The pins that are left standing, we often have another chance to kind of get to them, but at the end of the day, those 2 pins that are staring, looking at you, are kids who need the most support and are kids who need the most challenge. So we end up choosing one, and the other one is left standing. I just took all the fun out of bowling. Now, I don't know how many times you've watched professional bowling, but I spent an afternoon watching professional bowling, and let me tell you, there was not one bowler who rolled that ball down the middle of the lane. They throw the ball down the lane at a curve. And I was actually really curious about this, so I called up a professional bowler. He was so excited. I don't think he gets a lot of calls about education. He said the reason why the ball has to enter at a curve is because you will knock down more pins and create a bigger domino effect if you enter at that angle. But in order to do that, you have to change your aim. In order to knock down the most pins with one shot, he aims for the pins that are the hardest to hit. Now let's just let this sink in for a second. We are taught to teach the head pins. We are not taught to teach to the kids who are the furthest and the hardest to get to, the kids with autism, the kids with Down syndrome. The part that's critical here, and it really aligns with Universal Design for Learning, is that so often the supports that we design for those kids on the outside of the lane are actually supports that all of the kids need. This is the part we need to understand if inclusive education is going to move forward in Canada. How can we find this value of diversity in our classrooms between the students? This is not just important for the outside pins, but it's critical for every single one of us. And just think, all we need to do is change our aim. Look how bowling changed education.
I just really think that video is very powerful, and it's just a great analogy, and she's an excellent storyteller. So this was actually a resource that was shared with me by one of the participants who attended this training, and then I quickly incorporated it into the training because I just think it's awesome, and it's something that you can share with other educators and other administrators and people that you work with. So good. I'm glad you enjoyed that. Okay, so we are going to move this screen, see what works. So next, so we talked a little bit about the law and that research supporting the need for more inclusive education for our students. And so now we're going to move into the next part where we're going to be looking at some specific strategies and resources to help facilitate that process. I think that, this is a challenging thing that we've been asked to do. We were being told this is important, get these students out more, and it's a little overwhelming for everyone. I think that what are our next steps? And I think this is kind of how most of the people I'm talking to are feeling. They're feeling a little overwhelmed. They're feeling like, how are we supposed to get it all done? And I think what I'm trying to encourage people to do is to stay as positive as possible. We can either slide into these depths of despair of this is too hard and there's too much to do, or we can say, yeah, there's a lot to do, but it's important and we want what's best for our students. So what is one step I can take? What's one thing I can try to start moving in that direction? And this morning I decided just to try. I Googled inclusive education strategies, and there were like 2.4 million hits came up. And I mean, there's so much information out there. So I'm just trying, and we could talk about this all day. And I'm sure many of you have things that you're doing that work for you. I'd love to hear about them. Please share them with me. I'm just going to share some of the things that I have been recommending to teams and have worked on with teams. So let's move into the strategies and resources. Just a reminder, inclusion is not simply about proximity. It's about intentionally planning for the success of all students. So we know that it's not just about putting students in a room and hoping that it works. And it's about that close collaboration and planning. I've talked to people where, I've talked to teachers where their districts have just decided, we're closing our mild, moderate STCs, we're putting all the kids out, we're doing it right now, good luck. And they're struggling a little bit because there hasn't been as much planning. And then I've spoken with teachers at districts where they're moving a little more slowly. They're maybe starting with one grade level, or they're starting with one site and learning from what's working and what's not, and then being able to tweak it from there. So how do we plan? Michael Giangreco, he talks about levels of participation in content, and I think this is something that, for us all to keep in mind when we're thinking about what are the students going to be doing when we take a student with disabilities and put them into a general education classroom, what are they going to be doing in that room? And I think sometimes there's this belief that for it really to be inclusion, they need to be doing exactly the same thing that the other students are doing. But there are different levels and there's different ways of looking at it. So there is the same level of participation where the students are, basically doing the same thing that the other students are doing, but maybe they're being given a little bit more time, or they're being asked to do a little bit less work, fewer problems or whatever, but basically doing the same thing. A multi-level participation is where the students are all, maybe everyone in the classroom is working on math, but a majority of the class is working on division, and then you've got a student who's working on addition or subtraction or something, because that's where they're currently working on their math skills. So they're doing the same curricular area, but doing a different level of work. Curriculum overlapping, so that's where you have students who, they're engaged in the same lesson. The lesson has been adapted or modified for them, and they're working on different concepts, different skills that they need to work on. So this might be, as this example says, there's it is a science class, and the general education students are really working on learning those science concepts, but we may have a student in there who's working on their fine motor skills and their communication skills, on working, with another peer, or working on communicating with someone else. So that would be curriculum overlapping. And then alternative curriculum would be a student who is pretty much doing their own thing. They have their own programming, but it's happening in that general education classroom. And that could incur outside of the classroom too if they're being pulled out to another learning environment, but they're kind of just doing a completely different thing based on their needs. And I think that when we're talking about students with maybe more mild, moderate disabilities, trying to involve them at that same level of participation or that multi-level of participation is great, and it's a great goal. As we working with students who have more significant disabilities, we may be looking more at the curriculum overlapping or even alternative curriculum. It's important. I always, because I have my mod severe background, I always have my moderate severe hat on. I think that it's important to be able to think about how to get our students out and included and have interactions with their peers, and to work on these things they need to work on, such as in curriculum overlapping, working on those socialization skills and those communication skills. And we want them to have access to the general education curriculum, and we want to always have high expectations, but we also need to make sure that we're helping those students meet the needs that they have. Our goal is for them to be as independent as possible when they leave the school system. So how can we help them be more included in that general education environment while also making sure that they are having opportunities to practice the skills that they need that will help them become more independent. We talk a little bit about one of the things that we do here at the Diagnostic Center every year. We offer a goal writing symposium for teachers, where we have teachers come here to Fremont, or this year we took our show on the road and we had held the symposium up in Marin County. But really, we bring everybody together to talk about, like, how do we write a good IEP goal, we talk a lot about how we determine what the goals should be. And I think it's important just to keep in mind, no matter what level of participation in content we determine is appropriate, we are always, making sure that they have goals that address their needs and that are in alignment with the California standards. So to do that, we want to always look closely at all the assessment data that we have, look at what the students' areas of need are and what their strengths are, prioritize those area of need, and then really think about the best use of students' time in school. We don't have them for that long. How are we going to make sure that we're using our time effectively? So we encourage a process where you, based on all of that information, you determine your goal area, write the goal and then link it to a standard, link it to a California standard. We do think that we know that it's the law says we need to have IEP goals that are rated that are tied to their grade level standards, but also it is possible. Our IEP documents have the little box we can check that says that the goal that we wrote addresses other educational needs resulting from their disability. So while we always want to make sure they have IEP goals that are tied to the standards at grade level, it's also okay to have some goals that maybe are not tied directly to a grade level standard, but that are important to the student. The example I always think of is money. For example, we've got students who money standards, money activities are only included in standards at like the second grade level, but we know that that's a real functional skill that a lot of our students are working on as they get older, and so that would be an example of when we would want to check that box, saying that it addresses other educational needs. So I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about Dr. Richard Villa. Dr. Villa is one of the leading researchers on inclusive education. He's got lots of great information. His website is here in the PowerPoint, and I encourage you to check it out. He travels all over the country talking about inclusion, and he posts all his PowerPoints are there on his website, and you can pull them down and look at all of his recommendations. I got to see him speak last year at an inclusion conference, and if you ever have an opportunity, you should listen to him. He's very motivating and kind of interesting to hear how he thinks about how we make inclusion work. But these are just a few of the things he talked about that kind of resonated with me. He talked a lot about the idea of retrofitting our lessons, retrofitting these general education classrooms in order to include our students with disabilities versus kind of being proactive and setting this up from the beginning. And he says that's really what UDL is about. UDL is not about looking at a lesson and trying to fix it, but about designing a lesson from the beginning that is set up to be as accessible to as many students as possible. He talked about how often we come together to talk about students and to think about how we can help support them, but then we end up spending so much of our meeting time talking and admiring the problem, as he said. He talked about how it's helpful to, when you're going to be coming to a meeting to talk about a specific student, like have already, shared and reviewed data, kind of already understand what's going on with the student so that we can spend our time in meetings thinking about what can we do about it, how can we help the student be more successful. He had the message about how collaboration is to inclusion as location is to real estate, and we'll be going back to that throughout the rest of our webinar about how inclusion won't work without lots of close collaboration and communication amongst team members. And then his big thing is to always look at what are the student's strengths, what is that student good at, how do we use that student's interest to help them be more engaged and more of a participant in the classroom. So one of his forms is called, it's a lengthy title, I don't know why it has such a long name, but Using the Power of Two or More Student and Class Mismatch and Solution Brainstorming Worksheet. So this document, and I'm going to pull the Padlet back over to show you, this document is something that I recommend to teams when they have a student who is being included in a general education environment as a way to kind of help you think through who the student is, what's going on in the classroom, what are the barriers, what are where's the breakdown, and then brainstorm what you can do about it. Dr. Villa walked us through this form at his training. He also talked about, he was a principal for a while, and he said he used to use this idea at staff meetings where he would pick a teacher who was maybe had a student that she was kind of struggling and wasn't really sure what strategies to use, and let that teacher spend just a few minutes at the beginning of the staff meeting saying, this is what's going on with this student, and this is what's going on in the classroom at the time, and how can I help support this student more? And then all the teachers would write down some ideas, whatever came to their mind, and share those with that teacher. So the teacher would leave the meeting with lots of ideas of things to try, because sometimes just having that time to brainstorm and talk things through is what really helps. So this document, it 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 takes, the first time I filled it out, it took me a little while, and each time I do it, it's a little bit easier. I would not ever suggest that a team would fill this form out for every single lesson going on in the general education classroom. I mean, that's not realistic, but if you can, a special education teacher or a program specialist, administrator sits down with a general education teacher or a team and kind of think about maybe one lesson that's, or two lessons that are maybe kind of routine lessons that happen, frequently, throughout the week or through, monthly, and kind of break it down as you fill it out once or twice. It just kind of triggers in your head, different ways of thinking about the student, and helps as you plan for future activities. So for this form, in the left-hand column here would be all the facts about the student, who the student is. And, Dr. Villa always goes back to strengths. What are those student strengths? What are the student's interests? What is the student's learning style? How about multiple intelligences? Any information you have about that? What are the students' important relationships? Overall, what are the goals and concerns? And what other information do we have about the student? So this is, once you fill out that column, that could be used over and over again. But this is just a reminder of who is this student that we're talking about. So you've got a student with disabilities included in this general education classroom. What do we know about the student? So then you move into the facts about the class, or the facts about the lesson, looking at, what's the lesson? What are the content demands? What are the product demands? What are the students creating? And what processes are they going through in order to participate and be part of that activity? And we're talking about just for the entire class, what all the students are being asked to do. And, Dr. Villa talked about the importance of, we're not judging the lesson, we're not judging the student, we're not, we're just very factual at this time. Who is the kid? What's going on in the classroom? And then you get to look at what are the mismatches. What's not fitting between who this student is and what the class is being asked to do. And then finally, in the last column is where you would brainstorm. And Dr. Phillips says, write everything down, even if it seems like a crazy idea, because you never know. You might loop back around and figure out a way to make that crazy idea work. But just get all your ideas out, and that's why it's nice to do it as a team, and think about, well, here's who the student is, and here's what's going on, and here's what the problems are, and then here's some possible things to do to make it better. And, when you're doing this, he always, again, encourages you to think about the students' interests and their strengths, and try to play to those as much as possible. So when I recommend this to teams to use as a strategy, I try to include an example in the report that has that's been kind of filled out for them, so they can kind of get an idea of how they could break it down. So I have two here on the Padlet that you can look at later, and I'll pull one up and go over it briefly. So this one was filled out for a student who, now why isn't it opening? So is the form, and you can look at it more closely when you can pull it up from the Padlet yourself. But this is been filled out for a student. So this is filled out for a student who he had Down syndrome. He was included in a kindergarten classroom, and they were looking at ways to help facilitate that. So the lesson, mine's very specific to a very specific lesson, because it's a lesson that I was able to observe when I was in the classroom. So facts about the student. He really wants to do things for himself. He's got some emerging early academic skills. Interests. He's very interested in interacting with the other students in the classroom. He also has an iPad that he loves. So I mentioned that down here under other information also, that he has access to an iPad throughout the day. Visual learner, kinesthetic learner. Important relationships. He had a paraprofessional who he was very close to, and he had a great relationship with his resource teacher as well. And then, his overall goals, and concerns. He was functioning well below age grade level expectations, had severely impaired speech language skills, lots of behavior challenges. He was communicating a lot throughout the day through his behavior. And, part of that it led to this difficulty interacting appropriately with peers. He was very interested and wanted to, interact with everybody, the other kids, but he was struggling with that. So the lesson that I observed was it was Dental Health Month, and they were reading this short grade level text about how to take care of your teeth, completing an art project. It had a big construction paper mouth with teeth, and then it had a sentence sentence frame underneath that said, "I will take care of my teeth by," and then it was blank. There was a blank, and then the teacher had written a bunch of ideas of ways to take care of your teeth up on the whiteboard. And so the students were supposed to read this text, cut, glue, and create this art project. They were supposed to choose an answer from the board and write it into the sentence frame. And then they were going to turn in this final completed art project. The process demand, this was all very independent. The students were all working on their own to complete these activities. So what are the mismatches? Well, the student can read some words by sight, but he is not going to be reading a grade level text by himself. He needs assistance to, be able to. Fine motor was a little bit of a challenge also, and he wasn't going to be able to cut, glue, and put this art project together on his own. He wasn't be able to look up. He wouldn't be able to look up at the answers on the board and choose one, and then be able to write it onto a sentence strip. And overall, he isn't able to work very independently at this point. He needed a lot of prompting and support throughout the day to finish activities. So then in looking at, well, what are some solutions? What can we do to look at this mismatch? Well, we could adapt that grade level text and pair words with pictures to make it more accessible to him. You could, and often a lot of the, when I talk about ways to support these kiddos in the gen ed environment, it's always, trying to look at using peer supports as much as we can as well. So he could have a peer read the story with him. You could have the art materials all cut out ahead of time for him. If the goal of this activity is not for him to be working on his fine motor right now, but just to be participating and finishing this product, then we can have things ready to go for him. Again, having a peer buddy help him kind of glue the pieces together, and then giving him pictures of 3 different things that he could do to take care of his teeth, and allowing him to choose one of the pictures and then glue it into the sentence strip. Finally, this I was thinking, well, again, what are his interests? What does he like to do? He loves to interact with the other students, and he needs some support to do that, but he does. That is an interest of his. So giving him the opportunity to get up and when he's finished, he can share what he did and show some of his classmates and staff members in the room what he had done. So this example is on the Padlet, and oh, look, it came up on the screen eventually. So you can see that here, and there's another example also, just to kind of look at how that is put together. Okay, so I'm going to return here to the PowerPoint. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk a little bit about is co-teaching. I don't know if you guys are doing any co-teaching in your districts or where you are, but some more and more, it seems more and more districts are giving it a shot and providing an opportunity for teachers to work together, a general education teacher paired with a special education teacher in order to teach a group of kids that are students with disabilities and students without. So Dr. Villa talks about 4 main approaches to co-teaching. I heard one woman speak one day about 11 different strategies. There are so many approaches and ways to do this, but co-teaching really it comes down to the relationship between the teachers, the communication between the teachers, and that planning time, having time to work together to think about how you're going to set this up and make it work. I was able to observe a district that's doing a lot of co-teaching. Woodside High School District across here in the Bay Area. They're a high school district, but they only do well for their students with more mild moderate disabilities. They are only doing inclusion in co-teaching classrooms. So they aren't doing it right now for their students with moderate severe disabilities, but they do have all their students with mild moderate disabilities. They closed all their mild moderate SDC classrooms, and they have all the students out in these for the core curriculum area. They have them out in these co-teaching classrooms. So the teachers work in pairs. They have a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher, and they have about a quarter of each class are students with disabilities. They have a mutual planning period each day. And, in order for this to work, I think, it really, and they say the reason it works for them is because they have the administrative support and from their superintendent level down. This is a priority to them, and this is something that they want to do. And so even when they're hiring teachers now, that's part of the interview. How do you feel about co-teaching? And, we're going to make it work. But, it's never easy, and it takes time to build those relationships and move into this role, move into this way of doing things. But it was really cool to watch these teachers in action that had been doing it for a while together. I know in one of the classrooms, I leaned over to the program specialist and I said, hey, which one's the gen ed teacher and which one's the special ed teacher? And her response to me was, well, you figure it out. You tell me. And honestly, I couldn't tell. And I think we talked about it later, and you kind of start to pick up on some clues. But, I think that's the sign of a really good co-teaching relationship is when you really can't tell. And I know that part of that, especially at the junior high school level, it becomes about the, knowing the content. And I think sometimes the special ed teachers think, throw me into this, high school math class, and I don't have the background in that, and this teacher does. But then that teacher the gen ed teacher often feels like, they need the help with the students with disabilities. And then what's great is that they end up learning in a good co-teaching relationship. They end up learning from each other. And one of the special ed teachers told me, wow, I've never been so good at math since I started co-teaching. So, and the general ed teachers feel like they learn a lot about how to better support their students who have special learning needs. So one of the methods of co-teaching that Dr. Villa talks about is supportive teaching, and that's where one teacher takes that lead instructional role and the other teachers like rotating amongst the students, providing support. The teacher who's doing the supportive role is really kind of interacting with kids and observing and seeing what's going on in the classroom and then providing that one-on-one assistance when necessary. I think one thing that's important in this role, in this approach, is that, we don't want the special ed teacher to always be the supportive teacher kind of walking around the classroom and helping with students. We want that to go both ways, and we want the special ed teacher to be able to lead the lesson and have the general education teacher have that opportunity to walk around and support kids as well. The second model that he talks about is parallel teaching, and that's where you would have two groups of kids, for example, heterogeneous groups of kids, where you're working, one teacher's working with half the class, the other teacher's working with the other half on the same lesson or on different parts of the lesson, and then maybe you switch groups halfway through. Maybe there's a third table where students are working independently as well, and then they're team teaching in this way. The next model is complementary teaching, where one teacher may be leading the activity and the other teacher is doing something to enhance the lesson. So this example here is that maybe one teacher is teaching and the other one is modeling how to take notes or paraphrasing. This may also take the form of one teacher doing some kind of pre-teaching, work with students before a lesson to make sure that they're kind of primed and ready. And then finally, like true, team teaching that Dr. Villa describes would be the goal of co-teaching, to move to a point where these two teachers are really truly sharing all of the roles of being a teacher in the classroom, all of the planning and the instruction and the assessment, all of the equal responsibility for everything going on in the room. and there may be some of that teaming too, where one is demonstrating the steps of a science experiment while the other is helping students take notes and log what's happening. I think in the classroom that I observed where it was the strongest relationship, it was great because there wasn't just one person leading and one person supporting. It was just kind of both of them teaching and just bouncing ideas off of each other, and the students were really engaged in that classroom. That piece of the instruction, moving back and forth. So people always ask me like, well, that's a great idea, but what if we're not really, my district's not there, my admin's not there, and what can we do? And I've encouraged some teachers to say, well, why don't you look at like maybe a lesson where you could team teach? Approaching one of the general education teachers and saying, hey, let's do a lesson together, let's do a unit together, and then being able to take students with you into that room and piloting this, giving it a shot, doing a few lessons together, and then seeing what develops from there. Sometimes that's one way to kind of get your toe in the water and think about like looking at co-teaching. And that gives another inclusion experience for your students. You're getting them out of your room and taking them into this general education environment, and then working with that teacher on some of the general education curriculum and helping that teacher kind of break it down for students. So now I'm going to be talking about two types of activity matrices. One is one that we often recommend here at the Diagnostic Center, where you look at how are you infusing IEP goals throughout the school day for a student. And then the other one is an activity matrix for inclusion that was created by a woman who used to work for the Inclusion Collaborative at Santa Clara County Office of Education. And I will be talking a little bit about them also. So the activity matrix that we often recommend here is it's a matrix where across the top you would have all of the goal areas for the student, and broad, I would say broad areas, not specific IEP goals, but more broad areas such as communication, independence, social skills, motor, academics. And this one has been designed kind of with a student with more moderate severe disabilities in mind, but you could tweak the form for whoever the student is. You may have columns you don't need for a specific student, but you can adapt this and adjust it in any way that you need. So across the top would be all of the goal areas, and then down the left-hand column would be all of the activities of the school day. And so then usually the teacher might take the lead in starting to fill this out, kind of looking at, well, here are the academics that the student will be working on through each activity of the day, and here's some independent skills the student can work on, and some social skills piece. And then if you have this as a soft copy document, you can email it off to the next person on the team. So then if the student has a speech therapist on their case, or even an assistive technology specialist, or an OT, or a PT, or adaptive PE, those people can add all of their information onto this document. And then you have kind of a finished product that, I think this activity matrix is extremely helpful when you have a student who is supported by a paraprofessional in a general education classroom, where you may have every intention of speaking to that paraprofessional very frequently, but we all get really busy, and we want to make sure that those paraprofessionals know what we want them to be working on with the student throughout the day. And this kind of lays it all out, and it's also a way of showing how, even during arrival time in the morning, even during recess, we can be working on goals in all of these areas. The document can also help, I think, with, for example, if you have a parent who maybe is really pushing, saying they need more speech services for their student. We need 8 hours a week of speech therapy. You can, with the document like this, you can very clearly show how, we are working on communication all day long through every activity of the day in this exact way. We are working on social skills all day long. We're helping the student develop those social communication skills throughout every activity of the day in this way. And so you can really lay it out for them. I encourage these documents also can be a great communication tool, again, with the paraprofessionals, in terms of, they can write notes on it and say, I don't, I don't know how to get the student to do this. It's not working. Or they can already do this. What's the next step? And then they can share that, pass that around to you, and then you can help them look at that activity. Someone just asked me if it'd be provided with a soft copy of the matrix, and yes, it's on the Padlet. I'm going to show that to you now. No, it didn't go over there. Okay, it is on the Padlet. And if you want me to email it to you for some reason also, you can email me and I will send you a copy. You can also find it on the Captain website, another place. Jessica, if you want an email copy, please do send me an email. You get my email address at the end, and then I will send it to you. So it's here. The blank one is here for you to see. We'll see if it actually pulls it up. Yep, so here's one here. And then I filled out a couple. So typically, again, when I recommend this to a team, I fill it out for a few activities just to give them an idea of what that would look like. And we won't go through it all now, but just to see, like, okay, here's what this student was going to be doing during arrival, during language arts, and during recess. I think the recess thing is key because sometimes we see students who it's recess time and maybe they have a paraprofessional who would be supporting them, but it becomes kind of a break time for the paraprofessional. But really, like, so much can be addressed at recess, and we want to have the para helping to facilitate some of those things for students who need that. So that can be really helpful to have recess laid out on that form. Okay, so now back to the. Oops. I gotta keep moving it, move it far enough. Okay. So the next activity matrix was one that was created by this woman, Katie Engleter, who worked for the Inclusion Collaborative in Santa Clara County. This way she has it set up is that you would have the schedule or activity going on in the classroom, what the goal for the whole class is, what the child's target is, any modifications, this could probably also say / adaptations, para responsibilities, and then a column for any notes on performance and how it's going. So this is another way of filling it out and filling out a form to kind of look at what's exactly going on in the classroom and how are we going to support the student. So in this example that she provided, it was reading time. The class was reading independently for 20 minutes. For this student, she wanted him to read for 10 minutes and then get a break. The modifications, they were providing him with a simplified book that had large print. And then this para responsibilities part, she had written that the para will modify the reading passages so that it uses the child's vocabulary. And I did add this part in brackets here under teacher's direction because I think that's important. I think sometimes, we want to make sure those paraprofessionals can be such a huge support to us as teachers, and we want them to help us modify materials, but we need to make sure that we're giving them the direction and telling them how we want them to do that instead of leaving that to them. And then the column where they can add any notes for performance. I have a link here to the Inclusion Collaborative. So the Inclusion Collaborative is based in Santa Clara County, out of the Santa Clara County Office of Education. They have received funding. I think they actually just got another big grant to be able to provide lots of information about inclusion supports to districts throughout the state. So this is a great resource. They have, if I click this, let's see if it's going to work. Just quickly show you on their website, they have information here. Let's see, I can't get it to scroll, but they have inclusion supports down here where you can get lots of information. They also have done lots of trainings, and if you go to this link, you can find a lot of their trainings that they've done have been recorded, and they're posted here, and so you can watch them or check out PowerPoints. They also do a large inclusion conference every fall. So I've been able to attend the last couple of years, and they really, it's a state, it's for everyone in the state, and they get some great speakers and have some great sessions and provide a lot of information. So they even have a warm line, they call it their warm line, where you can call them and just be like, I've got this student and they're included and we're having this issue, and they'll like talk you through ideas. So that's kind of cool. So I do encourage you to check out their website and pay attention to what they're doing. Actually, when I saw Dr. Villa speak, it was here at their conference, and they have posted some of, you can watch videos of his sessions. So I do recommend that as well. Okay. Just a note about assistive technology. We could talk about assistive technology all day as a way of helping students access curriculum and providing them different ways to engage with the academic material. And I actually do a training on assistive technology, and it's its own 3-hour training that it's never enough time because there's just so much out there, and so we can't really dive into it. But I think it's just kind of a reminder to always keep that in mind when we're thinking about how can we help the student access this activity. Can we use technology to help that? The class is doing a writing project, and they're writing essays, and our student maybe can't do that, but how can we use technology to provide them with an adaptive word processing program, or using some kind of dictation, or what are other ways that we can help them participate in the lessons using technology. Connect is a group who they're primarily focused on early intervention and looking at how we support our youngest students, but they also have these modules, and again, they're primarily geared toward the little kiddos, but they do have a module on assistive technology, and so it's a nice little module online place to look to get some more information about how we can use assistive technology in the classroom. And they share this assistive technology planning tool, which is also here on the Padlet. And I included that here just to show you. So the way their form is laid out, you would look at what is the overall learning goal or participation goal for the student. What's currently happening? What would you like to see happen? And then, looking at different types of assistive technology, because we know that can be anything from like real low tech to high tech, different changes to the environment that maybe we need to make, different equipment we can provide. How do we get to change this activity, maybe to include some kind of adaptive software or application, or same thing. How can we change the materials? Maybe we're going to present it in a different way, utilizing technology. Do we need to change the schedule, the way this is set up for the student, or adapt the instructions? And then how are you going to support that child in using that assistive technology? Are we going to be modeling? Are we going to have another peer support? They list hand-over-hand assistance, which is never my favorite, but maybe if we're moving through a series of prompts to teach the student to be able to access something more independently, maybe that would be a first step. So this tool is just another thing to think about, another resource that may be helpful. Okay, I'm going to move this back. All right, so just a little note and discussion briefly about collaboration. We know that inclusion is not going to work unless teachers are talking to each other. We need to build that time in for collaboration amongst team members. And I think that, there's really no way around it. Everyone says, but we're busy, but there's no time. Well, that's not going to change. So we need to think about how we can make it happen anyway. And I think, the general education teachers, they need support so that they feel like this is doable. Some of them are going to be, have had more experience with this than others. I think often it's the behavior piece that can be really challenging for the general education teachers when they have a student with disabilities in their room who is engaging in behaviors that maybe they're not typically used to seeing. And so finding ways to support them with that, and providing training and resources to them. Sometimes I think the general education teachers benefit from just kind of a reminders that, they know how to teach, and if they can get past the idea of thinking of this as, oh, this is a student I wouldn't normally have in here, and just think about the kiddo as a student who is a learner, they can kind of get past that initial kind of panic or worry. I recently had a conversation with one of my close friends who's been teaching kindergarten for 20 years, who called me in a panic because she had this student with autism newly in her room, and was really experiencing a lot of challenging behaviors from the student, and she was panicking, and I had to calm her down and just try to like get her to realize, like, you've been doing this a long time, you've also had students with autism included in your classroom before, you know a lot about autism, and you can do this. He's a learner. Let's talk about how we can meet his needs. So I think sometimes they just need that extra support. But the collaboration piece is just so important. I assessed a student in a district nearby a couple years ago who was a student who had very profound physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities, and he was fully included in a general education class on a campus where there were no special day classes. There was a resource teacher who was his case manager, and she had great intentions and wanted him to succeed, but really just didn't have a lot of experience working with students with his level of need. And so, through the assessment process, we gave her lots of ideas and strategies and things to try to help with his inclusion time. But she called me about a year later and was just, I don't know, this isn't working. I don't know what to do. This is crazy. And as we talked about it, what became really evident quickly was that she just was kind of trying to do it all by herself and really wasn't communicating with anybody. When when do you talk to the gen ed teacher about how things are going or what's upcoming? She said, oh, I don't know. We never really see each other. Well, the student had a pretty complicated communication device, and well, how is SLP helping to support that? Oh, I don't know. I never see her. That kept coming up. We never talk, and so my first recommendation with her was, you need to get some meetings on the calendar. And I know for me in my personal life, even if it's on the calendar, it's much more likely to happen. So I always encourage teams to kind of think about, let's get some meetings on the calendar from the beginning. Whether it's each trimester or quarterly, or we can't just meet at the IEP time. When are we going to meet more frequently to talk about what's working and what's not? But then, day to day or weekly, what can we do? And then that becomes, about communicating to each other about what your preferences, what your preferred methods of communication are, what good times are for you. Discussing what can be done what needs to be done in person versus what can be done through phone calls or email or text messages, and kind of deciding how you're going to meet. Maybe you're going to talk to the gen ed teacher on Wednesdays before 15 minutes before school starts, because that's a good time for you guys. Maybe you're going to check in, a couple of evenings a week, because that's what works for you. It's really going to be coming down to what's going to work for you and for the members of the team. Just a reminder about the paraprofessionals. The job of that paraprofessional is to support the student in implementing the instructional programs that have been designed by the teacher, by the teachers, by the who have hopefully if we're talking about a student who's being included, hopefully have been designed by the general education teacher and the special education teacher. It's so important that we're frequently communicating with the paraprofessionals who support these students, that we are providing the materials. I assessed a student recently who was had a paraprofessional. The student was fully included, and every day around 10 o'clock, the paraprofessional would pull the student out into the hallway for some one-on-one academic work, and she was pulling out all these activities. And I asked her, I said, so when does the teacher get you these activities, and how you guys communicate about these things? And she's like, oh, well, I just make all this stuff up, because I don't ever really talk to that teacher very often, and so I just found some things for him to do. And it was absolutely with the best of intentions, and really, she had some pretty good instincts, but she's not trained to be designing instruction. She's not paid for that, and we need to make sure always that paraprofessionals are being supported, and that we are providing the materials that we want the students to be working on. So again, just a reminder that the Padlet is there. It's full of information. There will be more added over time, and we're almost out of time, so we're not gonna. This would be if we had extra time here, but encourage you to think about as we come to the end of the webinar. Think about the things that we talked about today, some of the strategies that we talked about, the Dr. Villa's form about breaking the lesson down and looking at what how to bridge that gap between what the students are being asked to do and what the student is able to do. Looking at, is there some kind of co-teaching lesson you might want to try? Looking at using one of the activity matrices, either the one that we use here at the Diagnostic Center or the one that was described by the woman who works for the Inclusion Collaborative. Maybe looking at how we can increase the use of assistive technology to help a student be more involved in the classroom activities. Maybe just thinking about which student you can focus on, what small step you can take, and how you will improve collaboration. Maybe how you will improve your collaboration efforts, or how you can help staff, coworkers, teachers that you're working with move toward more inclusion. Someone asked me about accessing the PowerPoint after today. Some of you may have received a copy of it when you received the link to this webinar. It should have been attached, but it's also here. Webinar PowerPoint is located on the Padlet. And also, if you would like me to email it to you, you send me an email. I'll put the email address up in just a minute, and I can send you a copy as well. So just a reminder, inclusive education is dynamic, ever-evolving approach that requires ongoing reflection and continuous enhancement. So we know that this is something that we're going to be working on for a long time, and we're going to learn more, and we're going to get better at it, but we're going to be constantly needing to think about what's working, what's not working, what do we need to tweak, what should we try to do differently, and that dynamic, ever-evolving approach is truly what it is. So I have the screen up now that has my email address and my phone number. I do encourage you to please send me an email. You can call if you want, but I'm rarely at my desk, so email is the best way to contact me. Melvin, if you could please, I do see that here. I see your email address. The problem is that as soon as I turn off this webinar, I will lose this chat window. So if you could actually send me an email to this email address up on the screen, then I will make sure I send you a PowerPoint. And if you have any questions, we have a few minutes here, but hope that this is helpful to you. Oh, also, hopefully you also received a copy of the evaluation and the certificate that was included in the paperwork that I sent to the person who was organizing this training. And if you can, please, it's hard to get the evaluations back for a webinar because you're not here in front of me and I can't make you hand it to me before you leave the room. But if you could fill it out, and I appreciate the feedback, and you can fill it out and email it to me, scan it and email it to me, or even just if you want to just take a picture of it, with your phone and email it to me, that would also work. I can print it out from there. Is it possible to put up the Padlet address again? Yes, I can do that. Let's see. Someone asked for the Padlet address. There it is. My maiden name is Wild, so that's why it says Shannon Wild. And this, again, the Padlet's not supposed to be going anywhere, so hopefully it will stay up there. And if you have resources, please share them with me. And if you want to email me with any questions, after today, feel free to do that as well. I'm willing to talk to you or brainstorm through email. All right. I think that's it. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and please do let me know if I can support you in any way.